Greetings to all of you out there, and welcome back to another episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, episode number 87. I'm your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation, as you can see behind me. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments that they were flying in? Our purpose is to show how does the aviation world work and to increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. A lot of the stories you're going to hear on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show have never been told before. You're going to hear them for the very first time. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show is being brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. The 4-foot KC-135 you see here behind me is a Wall Pilot graphic. These are extremely well-researched and detailed 4, 6, and 8-foot graphics printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any of your walls or flat surfaces. We even did a 30-footer for a guy. We also do custom work. If there's an airplane that you really want on your wall with your name on it from a particular unit with a particular weapons load, go to wallpilot.com and fill out the custom sheet. There's now 147 ready to print, and they usually take about 3 to 5 days to show up. Go to wallpilot.com and look at the ready to print pull down box, and go to the custom box and let us do an airplane like you see here behind me. This is a custom made print. Folks, on this episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, I just returned from Tailhook 24, and I'm going to talk to you about one particular seminar that they had where the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, its commander, its air wing commander, 1 or 2 of its squadron commanders, and 1 or 2 of the junior officers spoke about their recent deployment to the Red Sea. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit Show and talk about the Eisenhower Strike Group and some of the things that I learned from their deployment to the Middle East while at Tailhook 24. Hey folks, I mentioned to you that I was able to attend Tailhook 24 in Reno, Nevada. Held at a new location because Tailhook outgrew the old one at the Nugget. They're at the Grand Sierra Resort, which was absolutely a fabulous place to have this event. Beautiful hotel, casino, good food, massive industry display with exhibitors bringing all kinds of cool stuff. To give you an idea, Lockheed had their F-35 simulator, and of course it's unclassified, but you can sit in it and shoot missiles, drop bombs. The air-to-air targets were Su-27 flankers. They had one scenario that I did, which was a raid of 6 different airplanes coming in, and you shoot them all down, work all the buttons, work all the electronics and everything. It's just a lot of fun. Lockheed also brought their T-50 trainer simulator with them too. Boeing had their T-7 Red Hawk simulator, which is the brand new airplane that they're going to replace the Air Force's T-38 with, which needs to be replaced because it's been being used since the early 60s. I got to fly it in the 80s, the T-38, fun jet, but boy, the T-7 is going to be absolutely fantastic. All glass displays. The throttle and the stick are pretty much like what's in the F-16, which I thought was fascinating. And then, of course, there was a couple of other simulators, but it was just wonderful to walk around the industry floor and see some of the cool things that are coming out and are being used now. While I was there, they had one seminar that I hope they have up on the Tailhook ready room pretty soon. The Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group had a recent deployment to the Middle East where they got to do just about everything a carrier strike group can do. And a matter of fact, the word they kept using is unprecedented. Tailhooks magazine from this past summer had an article about their deployment in there, and unprecedented was the word that they used constantly. There was a lot of firsts during this particular deployment, and the Carrier Strike Group 2, the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group 2, moved around a lot and was involved in a number of really kind of incredible operations that I want to spend some time with you. Not only did they have a lot of firsts, they had some joint operations with the Air Force. And we're going to focus on their operations in Yemen. And all of you heard in the news, all of you have heard all the news reports about ships being fired at by anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, what they call one-way attack drones or UAVs. And the Eisenhower battle group was in the middle of this. And the battle group admiral, Rear Admiral Mark Miguez, call sign STEM, the carrier air wing commander, a couple of the squadron commanders, and a couple of the junior officers, or JOs as they call them, were on this panel Friday morning. And I missed the first about, 20 minutes of this because I was talking to somebody on the industry floor, but was mesmerized when I sat down and listened to all of the things that they did during this deployment. And the one thing that the battle group admiral said, we weren't expecting this. This isn't what we thought we were going to be doing. And I want to read to you out of the Tailhook magazine from the summer of this year, the opening paragraph that is in the magazine, and the Eisenhower kind of describing what they're doing. It says, the 7 October 2023 terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel transformed the deployment of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Strike Group, leading to the most dynamic combat actions in defense of a carrier strike group since World War II. When Battle Axe is the call sign of Carrier Air Wing 3 that was aboard the Eisenhower, and Carrier Strike Group 2 returned from their composite training unit exercise last July of 2023. That's their workups to get ready to go on this deployment. The plan for deployment was simple: a port call in Split, Croatia, a brief stint in 5th Fleet, and then back to the 6th Fleet to continue our European tour. World events demanded a different path as the Secretary of Defense directed Carrier Strike Group 2 to make best speed to the Suez Canal and the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. We completed carrier qualifications and pushed east. I wanted to read that to you because it's a great opening for this episode. This carrier strike group didn't plan on a lot of the things that they experienced. And there was a lot of things that they did where they had to be very flexible and adapt, which I want to talk about. So just to give you an overview, Carrier Air Wing 3 has 4 Super Hornet squadrons in it, 2 F models, 2 E models. The F models are the 2-seater versions, VF-32 Swordsman and VF-83 Rampagers were the 2-seaters. Now, VFA-105, the Gunslingers, And VFA 131, the Wildcats, are E model squadrons. They also have VAQ 130 Zappers, which is the EF-18G Growler, the new jamming airplanes that have been in the fleet for a couple years. And they had a very interesting first. The E-2 Hawkeye squadron was VAW 123, the screw tops. And they had two helicopter squadrons that also were releasing weapons during this deployment. Helicopter Sea Control Squadron 7, which is the Dusty Dogs, and Helicopter Maritime Squadron 71, the Swamp Foxes. They're capable of carrying guns in the cabin, but they also carry Hellfire. And I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. And of course, supporting them with carrier onboard delivery was HRC 140, the Rawhides. This particular debt, they called themselves the Mambas, which I thought was fascinating. But the other group that was supporting them is called Desron, Destroyer Squadron 22. That's the USS Gravely, which is a destroyer. The USS Mason, also a destroyer. And what's the third one? There's a third one. Oh, the USS Laboon, another famous DDG. Now, I mentioned joint operations. The British also had one of their guided missile destroyers down there, HMS Diamond. And HMS Diamond also got to fire weapons at anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. This particular deployment, unprecedented. When you listen to these ladies and gentlemen describe what they were doing, there was all kinds of firsts. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through them. And there was one operation that they did in Yemen that was a joint operation with the Air Force. It was called Operation Yukon Lightning, where the E-2 Hawkeye and VAQ 130 Zappers, the EF-18G Growlers, were supporting the F-15E Strike Eagles from the 494th Fighter Squadron out of Lakenheath. And they did this joint operation to really knock back the Houthis' ability to fire and launch all of these weapons, not only at ships, but also at Israel. And you have to remember, too, in July of this year, the Israeli Air Force made an airstrike on a port. And I want to talk about that when I get to one of the operations that the carrier battle group did. So they arrive in the AOR on the 4th of November and immediately begin air operations for Operation Inherent Resolve. Operation Inherent Resolve is our air campaign over Syria and Iraq. They are doing this from the Red Sea, which means, of course, they're going to need tanker support. They use the F-18s, the two-seaters and single-seaters, as their kind of organic tankers. They call it the 5 wet configuration. They have pretty good size external tanks. They carry 4 of them. And then, of course, the center line has what they call the buddy store, which has their nice soft nurse basket on it. The KC-135, some of them were wingtip pod modified and were carrying what we call the multi-point refueling system, the MIPRS pods. Some of them were carrying the old Iron Maiden, which weighs, I think, 146 pounds. And I'll get to that in a minute. But they're doing long-range strikes and, of course, other operations throughout Syria and Iraq. And they end up being ordered to go up into the northern Arabian Gulf on about the 26th of November, I think it was. And again, they're just flying missions over Syria and Iraq, and they're tangling up with, I shouldn't say tangling up, that's probably the wrong word. The Russians are also doing operations over this area from an air base near Latakia, Syria, which is called Kaminaman. And they've got flankers, their drones, all kinds of things flying out of there. So kind of dicey when you have the Russians flying around, and they're not really our friends right now. But they're doing a lot of support for some of our ground forces that are in Syria and in Iraq doing operations. Now, in December, they're ordered into the Red Sea. And it's just before Christmas. And they're told, you need to get there now, because they're getting indications and warnings that the Houthi rebels, supported by Iran, are going to begin striking shipping and commerce going through the Gulf of Aden up into the Red Sea, and of course through the Suez Canal. I looked up how much commerce goes through this area, and it's somewhere around $2 trillion a year. There's cargo ships, obviously oil tankers that are coming down through here, and those are very big targets. And the Houthis had stated, all right, those of these ships that are aligned with Israel, we're going to hit you. And of course, the United States says, no, you're not. And then ordered the Eisenhower into the Red Sea through the what's called the Bab al Mandeb Strait, which is between Africa and Yemen. And it's very narrow, kind of a dangerous place. Now, this was called Operation Prosperity Guardian. And this was the United States and our coalition partners, like the British, operations to keep the Houthis from attacking shipping going through there. On the 26th of December, the Eisenhower Carrier Air Wing 3 has its first engagement and first air-to-air kill. A VFA 105 gunslinger F-18E Super Hornet engages a drone, a one-way attack drone, with an AIM-9X. I used to be stationed at Albuquerque, New Mexico in the Air Force's Operational Test and Evaluation Center, and I had all joint weapons. One of the programs I was working on was AIM-9X Block 2. AIM-9X Block 2, one of its requirements was to be able to engage and shoot down drones and cruise missiles. I had the opportunity, while working on this program, to go to Oceana Naval Air Station and sit in a two-seat Super Hornet, an F model, with the Navy program manager, who was a weapon system operator, and actually shoot some of these things in a simulator. I will tell you, the Block 2 missiles are freaking incredible. A cruise missile and a drone down low is a very tough target set, because you're trying to discern where the cruise missile or the drone is in the ground clutter being down low. Now, with the helmet mounted cueing system, which I was not wearing, and the radar and targeting pod that they have on the Super Hornet, you can actually find them pretty fast. And of course, my backseater, used to doing this, was able to call them out, and we were engaging them. And I was pretty surprised at how successful the Block 2 missiles of AIM-9X were engaging some of these slow-moving and fast-moving drones and cruise missiles. So the very first kill happens on December 26th. VFA 105, young lieutenant, splashes the first one. And of course, when you hear the term splash over the radio, everybody's going nuts because that means, okay, we've had our first engagement and it was successful. Well, just 4 days later, on New Year's Eve, the Yemenis and the Houthis are getting kind of frosty. And so not only are they sending out drones and cruise missiles and anti-ship ballistic missiles, but they're also sending out patrol boats. And I don't know, they didn't say if these were one-way patrol boats, if you know what I mean, suicide boats. But because they're down near the Bab al Mandeb Strait, which is narrow, and the Eisenhower is going through from the Gulf of Aden into the Red Sea, the helicopters are actually providing some defense, a layer of defense for the Eisenhower. Now, of course, they have fighters overhead at the same time, and the Super Hornets are armed with both air-to-air and air-to-ground ordnance. But the Dusty Dogs and the Swamp Foxes call sign during operations was ambush. They actually go out and engage some of these patrol boats that are attacking a commercial ship, the Maersk Hangzhou, which is I understand is a container ship. And they're going after it. And the SH-60, MH-60s handle the boats with Hellfire and 50 caliber machine guns. They go in and destroy, I think it was 4 of these patrol boats that are attacking the Maersk Hangzhou and send them to the bottom. So even the helicopters are getting some playtime with their Hellfires, taking out some of these smaller boats. Now, this is another kind of unprecedented thing. It's, as far as I understand, that was the first AIM-9X kill on a cruise missile or drone. And this is the first time that these helicopters have engaged these kinds of patrol boats, again, with Hellfire and machine gun fire. So, and at the end of this, I'm going to go through all the different firsts because there was an incredible amount of firsts for this deployment. Well, New Year's Eve goes by and there's a couple of engagements and stuff, but not a lot. And then the 9th of January is a huge night. And the IKE and Carrier 3 are operating mostly at night, which means they have aircraft on 5-minute alert. They have a surface combat air patrol above them, again, carrying air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons. But a lot of this is done off of 5-minute alert. And they called it the Battle of the BAM, the Battle of the Bab al Mandeb Strait. And you have to understand the Eisenhower strike group, carrier strike group, is now well within the Houthis' missile, cruise missile, drone footprint. They are inside the threat rings. Oh, and there's also surface-to-air missiles and early warning radars that are involved in this time period too. So they have a massive wave, multi-domain, multi-axis strike on the 9th of January, the night of the 9th of January, against the carrier strike group and some of these commercial ships. Now, before I go on, I want to explain one thing. The Navy uses what's called the Composite Warfare Commander concept. The battle group Admiral Mark Miguez, call sign STEM, is the overall hammer. But he has subordinate commanders that are also watching certain aspects of the fight. There's a surface warfare commander, there's an undersurface warfare commander, and in this case, there was an air and missile commander. And all of these commanders work together to solve some of these really complex problems facing the IKE strike group. The air and missile commander normally is the senior either cruiser or destroyer commander. So that means this particular captain was the senior destroyer commander, and he has the hammer on all things air warfare and carrier battle group defense. And I think they called him the air and missile commander was the term that they used. And on the 9th of January, the night of the 9th of January, they got indications and warnings that there was going to be a massive attack. And in fact, there was. So the Houthis gave them some kind of indications and warnings that they were going to do this, whether it was radar, painting, or whatever. They're trying to narrow down their targeting to send these drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles out there. So there was probably some type of electronic indication and warning that they got. And they said, okay, here it comes. And one other thing. They had E-2 Hawkeyes airborne. I don't think they had any of the Air Force assets like the RC-135 rivet joint down there. I think they were all up north in Syria and Iraq. But of course, the E-2 Hawkeye has radar home and warning. The fighters obviously do, as well as the growlers, the jammers. But each one of the ships has what's called an SLQ-32, which is kind of like their electronic support measures system, which is very sensitive. I've been on cruisers and destroyers and on carriers, and it can pretty much pinpoint where some radar is radiating out of, or where some electronic signal is coming from. I'll just put it that way. Anyway, the air and missile commander on one of these destroyers, she's pretty sure that here comes a raid, and it's a rather big raid. So the air and missile commander tells the IKE to launch the alert aircraft, and it ends up being 8 fighter airplanes, 8 Super Hornets. It ends up also being a couple of their organic tankers. Again, those are Super Hornets that are in the 5 wet configuration with 4 external tanks and a centerline store. They have about 8 to 9,000 give each. And of course, the E-2 Hawkeye is controlling all of this. Now, the USS Gravely, USS Laboon, the USS Mason are also working in concert with HMS Diamond, which is one of the new class Royal Navy destroyers. It is also down there participating in all of this. And they sense, I think it's over 20 targets that are coming at them. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and what they call one-way attack UAVs or drones coming at them. So they launch all these fighters off, and they're just blowing everything away. I think they kill 18 of these one-way drones, 2 cruise missiles, and 1 anti-ship ballistic missile, which gets taken out by one of the destroyers. A pretty eventful night. A pretty eventful night for these guys. So now, obviously, they know, all right, we're well within inside this threat zone. do we stay in it or do we move back? And moving back, again, in the southern portion of the Red Sea, not a lot of area there, not a lot of space. But they, in fact, do move back. And I want to talk about that here in just a few minutes about what effect that had on them. But now they know, hey, we're a target too. And of course, the news was making a lot about this. And you heard, hey, the Eisenhower got hit by some of these missiles or drones. No, it did not. That was false. And I talked to some of these people that were flying that night, and they told me nothing got through us. And a majority of these drones and cruise missiles were taken out by AIM-9X, which kind of brings me to my next point here. Flexibility is absolutely the key to air power. I don't know how many times you've heard that, but truly it is. One of the pieces of that flexibility is the ability to adapt to the threat. And adapting to that threat is super, super important. And so the Air Wing commander, who's in charge of how he fights his air wing, said, we got to make some changes. And the changes were to the configurations on the Super Hornets. And I've seen some pictures of this. And, well, here's a picture of it right here that you can see. They're now carrying 4 AIM-9Xs. And this configuration they called the heater wagon, because now you've got all these heat-seeking air-to-air missiles on. Actually, they're imaging infrared missiles. And folks, if you've seen the picture that the seeker head on this thing has, it's truly incredible. But because they're being overwhelmed by a number of these drones, cruise missiles, they also come up with another configuration where it's 4 AIM-9Xs and 5 AIM-120 AMRAAMs. They didn't carry 6 because they left the FLIR, the infrared targeting pod, on the left side, because that is also very useful in air-to-air engagements. And that is a sensor that when you lock on something like a jet or a cruise missile on radar, the FLIR, forward-looking infrared, also points at it. So you can have another way of identifying what that target is. So they're carrying 4 AIM-9Xs and 5 AIM-120 AMRAAMs. This configuration, they gave the nickname the Murder Hornet, which I found very fascinating. And just so you can see a picture of it, here it is. Notice you see it's got what's called the Launch Adapter Unit, LAU or LAU 115, that has AMRAAMs on both shoulders. You can see the single AIM-9X on the outboard pylon and on the wingtip. This is really a pretty monstrous air-to-air load. But when you have all of these anti-ship cruise missiles, these one-way attack drones, UAVs, this is how the battle group, this is how the carrier air wing commander said, this is how I'm going to do my fight. I'm going to change these configurations and do this. Now, some of these configurations normally have to go through testing in the Air Force, because obviously there's a weight and balance, all kinds of things. We call it Seek Eagle testing. And I don't know if the Navy has those same rules for doing this. But when we have a configuration on our airplanes that's new, they have to do these Seek Eagle tests to make sure that everything operates the way it's supposed to. I do not know if the Navy has those same rules, but this is the way the battle group
commander and his air wing commander said, this is how we're going to fight our fight. We're going to have the heater Hornet and we're going to have the murder Hornet, and we're going to have these guys airborne, and we're going to launch them off of 5-minute alert also. So those configurations are what they used in the air-to-air role. And I'm going to talk about the air-to-ground role because they use some fascinating weapons when they went after some of the surface targets also. Now they've had threats against the battle group, and they are going to go offensive now. Under the rules of engagement, under the NATO rules of engagement, even the UN rules of engagement, right to self-defense. And they have now been attacked by numerous launchers, and they've also got an air defense system, not very sophisticated, but they're still up against this air defense system that now they want to go and attack. And 3 days later, on the 12th of January, again at night, Carrier Air Wing 3 mans up and they go offensive. And they do a airstrike in Yemen that goes after a lot of targets. This is the first time, again, another first, where they've used the AGM-88E HARM missile. Got a new nickname, though. They don't call it HARM. It's called ARGM. The VAQ-130 Zappers and their EF-18G Growlers are carrying this newer long-range version of HARM called ARGM. And it stands for Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile. And they go after some of the early warning and SAM-site radars with this missile. They drop GBU-38 500-pound joint direct attack munitions on some of the launchers, but they're also using what's called GBU-54, which is the laser JDAM. So not only is it GPS guided, but the targeting pods on the Super Hornets can also guide these laser JDAMs just like a regular GBU-12. So it's got the best of both worlds to guide this weapon. And this was also another first that night, because VFA-32, the Swordsman, had jets that were carrying what's called the AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon version C. During the discussion in the panel, the Air Wing Commander or the Admiral said, normally we only went about 5 miles inland when we were going to attack something. We never went farther than that. And the reason I think for that, is because they didn't want to broaden the war, but they also don't want to put themselves in danger. So the joint standoff weapon allows them to launch this thing like over the beach. And of course, it's a glide weapon. It's got wings. And so it can go 40 to 70 miles inland and hit some of these other different types of radars and SAM sites. The JSOW has 3 different types of warheads in it. One is 1,000-pound warhead. One is like a cluster munition. And the third one is classified. Can't talk about it. Yes, I do know what it is, but again, that's a really close hold weapon, and its interior and its ability to do what it does remains classified as far as I know. So they do this strike, and of course it makes all the news because they're just blowing things away like crazy. And a couple of days ago, I posted on my TikTok and my YouTube channel the portion of the video that they showed going after the cruise missiles, the drones, and some of these targets. And I'm going to put that in right here. And for the next 30 seconds or so, you can see they're using AIM-9X predominantly to hit some of these drones and cruise missiles. And you can see in one instance, really low to the water. But then again, you can see these 500-pound bombs going after launchers and trucks and so forth. And some of these are hidden, but they're able to find them and strike them. Well, from this point, they transition to what they call dynamic targeting. And what dynamic targeting is, some of you out there may know it as time-sensitive targeting, which we used to do. And I'd have to go look it up in the doctrine manuals, but I believe it's the same thing. Dynamic targeting means you're going after high-value targets or pop-up targets that may go hide if we don't strike them right now. What's the term that they use in the doctrine pub? Oh, perishable. They use the term high value or highly perishable targets of high means that you want to strike and take out so that they're not a threat anymore. So they transition for, I think it's the next 5 nights into this dynamic targeting thing, because now they've stirred up a hornet's nest. And again, there's drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles that are all being fired, not only at them, but at this commercial shipping. And from what I understand, they're working in a target-rich environment, because obviously the Houthis do not understand our kill chain and our ability to find, fix, and finish targets. Because we obviously have UAVs that are also flying over the top of all of this, and they're hunting for targets, sending the mensurated coordinates to the flyers, and then, of course, dropping bombs on it. But they're still flying off of 5-minute alert. And one of the junior officers said something during this discussion that we all just laughed at, because it's true. He says, there's no greater morale boost than to launch off a 5-minute alert to trigger squeeze. And what he meant by that was being able to sit there on 5-minute alert, get launched, and within just a matter of minutes, you're either dropping bombs or shooting missiles at something. You're dropping bombs on some target, or more than likely on 5-minute alert, they're going after these one-way attack drones and anti-ship cruise missiles. And in the video that I just showed you previously, I'd be willing to bet a lot of those low altitude, low to the water type of engagements that you're seeing again on the forward-looking infrared targeting pod were off of these 5-minute alerts. Now, when you're doing this kind of dynamic targeting, it means that you're hunting the targets, finding the targets, fixing them, and engaging them. And this can be extremely gas intensive. And I had the opportunity after their seminar to grab a couple of the pilots from VFA 32 Swordsman and from VAQ 130 Zappers and talk to them about air refueling operations. I've already mentioned that they have the organic tanker, where they take a Super Hornet, put the 4 external tanks on it, the buddy store. But I asked them, hey, did you do any big wing tanking at all? He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. And during the Red Sea operations against the Houthis, they were tanking off of KC-135s coming out of Prince Sultan. So that's about 730-mile transit for the tankers. But again, it's our models. So yeah, it takes you a little while to get down there, but you still have a pretty good offload. If you're taking off with 180 fuel loads, 730 miles, they're probably showing up down over the Red Sea with probably about a 90K give, which is a freaking lot of gas. But here's the issue they told me. Here's the problem that they had. Some of the tankers, KC-135s, had the Iron Maiden, the boom drogue adapter on the boom. Now, this thing is pretty heavy, made of metal. It weighs about 146 pounds from what I understand, but it's only one contact point. And 90,000 pound give is great. It's not so great when you only have one contact point to pass it through. Now, some of the airplanes, the 135s out of Prince Sultan, were equipped with our new multi-point refueling system, the pods on the wings. And of course, they loved those because they're soft baskets. But the more important thing was they could refuel two at a time. Refueling two at a time saves you time. And when you're doing dynamic targeting, you don't want to be sucking down gas on the hard basket and have to leave when a pop-up target comes up. You want to be able to do it two at a time and do it quickly and be gone. Now, you can pump about 1,000 pounds per minute through the hose. These guys were probably taking anywhere between, I would think, between 6,000 to 9,000 pounds, maybe, as an average. Again, because it's the KC-135 and it's got a lot of gas on it. From the organic tankers like the Super Hornets, probably a little less, maybe the 3,000 to 4,000 pounds, but still having that type of platform, the KC-135, with the multi-point refueling pods is critical to the battle group operations. And I was kind of disappointed when I heard, well, we're refueling off the Iron Maidens. We wish we had more baskets of the wingtip pods. And I told him, I says, well, did you request them? Did you send a message to AMC saying, hey, we're involved in a lot of operations here right now, and we really, really need your 135s that have the multi-point refueling pod systems? And they didn't have an answer for that. They said, we didn't know we could do that. And just to give you kind of a historical note here, back in 2003, when we were going into Iraq for the Baghdad takedown of Saddam, I made it a point to put all of the KC-10s that were wing air refueling pod or warp equipped at Al Udeid to service the 3 carrier battle groups that were in the Northern Arabian Gulf. And I put all of the KC-135 Mippers podded aircraft at Akrotiri in Cyprus so that the Truman and Roosevelt could have those to suck gas down on because they were flying these big packages. Now, you might not think 8 airplanes is a big package, particularly when you've got 26 plane alpha packages that we're using during 2003. But when you're flying a 2-ship or a 3-ship of KC-135s in cell formation, and you have 6 hoses to suck gas off of. Oh, and one other thing that we did during Desert Storm is we put the KA-6D tankers, the A6s with that were equipped with the centerline drogue on the tankers so that we would have another drogue. You could do the same with the Hornets that are 5 wet for air refueling. Now what you have is a tanker force that can refuel quickly, and you can defend the tankers with the Super Hornet. which I tried to do during the 2003 war and was told by a colonel, sorry, you can't do that. Even though we did it during Desert Storm, they wouldn't let us do it during Iraqi Freedom. They said, no, 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 you can't have two airplanes together like that. You know, what do you think refueling is? And so they made us put the Super Hornet down 4,000 feet below the tanker. But if that Super Hornet ran out of gas, he'd just find the tanker above him because we put him in the same air refueling area. He would go back up and fill back up. You do the same for the Super Hornets in the Red Sea. If they need gas and they're empty, go find the KC-135 and fill back up, and then head off into your area of responsibility and pass that gas. And when you're empty again, come back to the KC-135, fill back up. Another problem issue that particularly the squadron commander of VFA 32 Swordsman, his call sign is IADS, and he took over while they were deployed. He told me, we had junior officers brand new to the jet 3 months out of the replacement air group where you train how to fly the Super Hornet, tanking off of the Iron Maiden for the very first time in their careers at night during combat operations. I'm sure that those JO's heart rate was way up because, again, the Iron Maiden can be very forgiving. And one of the problems that we've run into when we're trying to train the Navy is we can't get enough, we can't get a higher priority for us to send a KC-135 with MIPRS pods and the drogue to Fallon when they're doing their workups, or even to their base, so that these guys can and gals can get some training on how to do this. And that was also a disappointment to me. And that's something that's got to be worked out at the general officer, admiral, flag officer level, because I think it's a crime for a 3-month-old junior officer, JO, just launching off of alert, has just shot 2 AIM-9Xs at 2 different drones, his heart or her heart pumping like freaking crazy. And now you got to go up and refuel off of a system that you've never seen before. Never. And that goes for the MIPRS pods too. That can be tough. And they didn't go into, you know, if they had people fall off the basket, not get in the basket, all those kinds of things. They just said, we really wish that we had that training before we left the States, so that at least our JOs had seen it at least once. Now, I want to add one other air refuelable airplane to the mix. And this is something recent. The E-2D Hawkeyes are the advanced Hawkeyes, and the VAW 123 screw tops had these new advanced Hawkeyes. One of their modifications that's happened over the last couple of years is now they are air refuelable. They have a probe that is an overcranium kind of thing that kind of points out, you know, like this over the top of them. It's a fixed probe. It's not a retractable one. But now the E-2D Hawkeyes, the advanced Hawkeyes, are also air refuelable. I did not get a chance to talk to the E-2 Hawkeye folks. I'm going to call up there and find out and get some of their lessons learned from this. But now that makes only the helicopters that are not refuelable inside the air wing. The Hawkeyes fly, if I remember right, from 2003, they're flying about 5-hour long missions. So it was an hour transit, hour and 15-minute transit across Turkey. So that's 2 hours, 30 minutes, and they had about a 3 hour station time, I think. So 5.5 hour, that has now been extended. Because remember, air refueling increases three things: range, payload, and endurance. And in the case of the E3 Hawkeye, it's endurance. They're flying at a conservative speed to conserve gas, but now they can refuel, which I think is fabulous for these guys and gals. That now that airplane can stay up longer and perform its mission because it is now also air refuelable. When I was talking to the battle group Admiral Miguez, and he brought this up during his discussion, and you've always heard this. I don't know how many times we've heard this. Smart men study tactics, brilliant men and women study logistics. And this was also a tax on the logistics system, having them down there in the Red Sea, because we have no logistics bases in that area. You have to have the fuel. You have to have the food. You have to have the weapons all stored someplace that you can get to. And the Admiral said during his discussion, logistics was tough for us because their store ships were having to go from the Red Sea up to Sigonella, Italy, the island of Sicily, and I think they went to Cyprus too, to load up and come back. Normally, a carrier is underway replenishing about every 3 days. It was taking them 5 days to make the transit in the store ships. So you see the problems there. You may be low on weapons. You may be low on hamburgers. You may be low on jet fuel. And you have to arrange your schedule so that what used to happen every 3 days is now going to happen 2 days later, 5 days. Some of their fuel, I think he said, was actually coming from the Pacific. So it was coming around the Straits of Malacca, across the Indian Ocean, and up into the Gulf of Aden in that way. And that's, again, a 5 to 8 day transit. If we're going to fight the fight in the Red Sea against the Houthis, and let's include in there Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda group that's in the Sudan, in Mogadishu, Somalia, all those places, we've got to be able to establish some type of logistics location that we can keep all of this stuff. And Djibouti ain't it. Even though we have a big airfield in Djibouti that you can put KC-135s 6 across, I don't think there's enough places to store weapons and enough food and enough gas to be stored at that location. Not going to be able to do it in the Sudan. Aden, Yemen used to be one of our ports for doing this. Well, it's not owned by a friendly government anymore because the Houthis took it over. So whenever you're doing operations, you got to think of this logistics tail and what it's going to be. And during Operation Iraqi Freedom, the aircraft carriers, the 5 of them, were underway replenishing every 3 days. But now you have a store ship that has to go up to Cyprus or to Sicily to get the stuff that it needs. Oh, one other thing. You have to schedule its transit through the Suez Canal. And of course, that takes time and money also. Because believe me, you get charged for a no notice visit through the Suez Canal. The Navy euphemistically, they've nicknamed the Suez Canal the ditch. And for a whole host of reasons I'm not going to go into here. But again, if you're going to feed the fleet and the Air Force or a joint force in this region, then we've got to take a look at where we're going to put the logistics bases so that we can sustain operations there. Now, there actually is two of our Reaper locations down there. One of them is in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, and one of them is, of course, at Djibouti. And it's our own airfield that we have that we operate UAVs from. Again, these are Reaper drones that can carry 500-pound laser-guided bombs and Hellfire missiles. And then there's another airport, a very large airport that we've put a lot of money into that now has a very large ramp that you can park, I believe it's 6 KC-135s wingtip to wingtip. That's a large ramp. Okay. KC-135 takes up, I think it's 72,000 square feet or something like that. And a KC-10, KC-46 is around 105,000 square feet. So that's a big ramp. But you've got to be able to store fuel. You got to be able to feed the troops and store all that food. And a weapons storage area has certain security procedures that it has to go through. You have armed guards around it. You have fences around it. And of course, a lot of that weapons are stored in concrete bunkers, some of them underground. And to create a weapon storage area in a location is a very lengthy process, not only for diplomatic approval, but just setting it up, creating it, and then, of course, maintaining it too. Now, you have ships that are at Diego Garcia, south of the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, that, of course, can bring weapons up. You know, there was one that was there when I was there in 2002. I think they said it had 50,000 bombs on it or something like that. I mean, it was incredible. 500,000, 2,000-pound bombs and some other things. But to create a weapon storage area is not an easy process. And of course, you have to secure it once you've created it. So those are some of the logistics problems that we need to look at if we're going to continue having operations down in the Red Sea against the Houthis. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, dynamic targeting. If I haven't said it before, dynamic targeting can take a lot of gas because sometimes your perishable targets perish while you're airborne. And for the strike, excuse me, for the Super Hornets to come back aboard the aircraft carrier, they have to be under a certain weight in order to be able to engage the cable in an arrested landing. And you don't want to just dump those weapons into the ocean, particularly like JSOW or AMRAAM, just because they're so expensive. So that's the other thing you got to think about when you're doing this is, see, there's a lot of things involved in logistics. Come aboard weight is what it's called. And I noticed in the pictures, and let me put it back up here again real quick. You know, look at the Super Hornet here, and it's only carrying the one centerline tank. Well, if you've got tankers, particularly KC-135s about, you know, you only need to have one tank. It's flying with two empty pylons, which you could put weapons on, but this is the way the air group commander, carrier air group commander, chose to fight his fight, which I don't blame at all. But again, that's one of the other things you have to think about is the come aboard weight of the airplanes. A lot of times they'll just dump the gas to adjust their gross weight. But if there's going to be more of these dynamic targets show up, then you have to have the airplanes airborne. And what we did during Operation Anaconda is we left the strikers on the tankers. So that gas was never an issue. We had never done that before. We had talked about it at the 509th Weapons School, the KC-135 Weapons School. And finally, we had an opportunity to just tell the fighters and the strikers, to include the bombers, the B-1s, just hang out on the tanker. Just stay there. You know, they all looked at me like, can we do that? Well, of course you can. You're just holding underneath the tanker, right? And if you get tapped to go do something and you need gas, you know, just look above you and the tanker should be there, and go get the gas you need and go off and do what you need to do. But again, hanging out, waiting for these dynamic targets to show up can be very time consuming. And that's where you have to talk about effectiveness versus efficiency. Dynamic targeting and what we called on-call attack is very effective because you've got airplanes that can speed off and hit the targets, but it's not very efficient because you're on the tanker sucking down gas waiting for something to happen. And sometimes the interval between dropping bombs and hanging out and dropping more bombs can be lengthy, very lengthy. So now let's move to the 12th through the 17th of January of this year. And I mentioned earlier, they have 5 more big strike packages that launch again in the middle of the night off the Eisenhower, and they're going after more of these Houthi rebel targets. Some of the alert launches are going after the cruise missiles and drones. The destroyers, to include the Diamond, HMS Diamond, are knocking down some of these anti-ship ballistic missiles. Again, this is a job that the Navy's been doing ever since it was created. Freedom of navigation and freeing up commerce. The age of piracy back in the 1800s, the USS Constitution fighting the Barbary pirates. Well, these are modern day Barbary pirates that we're fighting with much more technological means, of course. But these packages, again, are very large. Excuse me, not very large, 8 to 12 airplanes. That includes the Strikers, the Super Hornets, the EF-18G Growlers that are doing the suppression of enemy air defenses or SEAD missions. And then, of course, you have tankers, not only the organic tankers, Super Hornets, but also the KC-135s. And they're launching helos because, again, they're having to deal with these small boats that are suicide boats, and they're going after them. And for these next 5 days, they're engaging a lot of one-way attack drones, anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. And that was a time period earlier in the year where you were seeing a lot of in the news. You were seeing a lot of SM-2, SM-6 launches out of the ship's decks. Well, now what they're doing, instead of using, you know, these multi-million-dollar missiles out of the ship's decks, they're using the fighters to shoot them down. The fighters can't do the anti-ship ballistic missiles. That's strictly a destroyer. The USS Gravely, USS Laboon, USS Mason, HMS Diamond, that's their tasking. But all these other drones and cruise missiles are being taken on by fighters. And I think they said like every night for these 5 nights, they're still engaging like 20 different targets that are being shot at them. And remember, during this time period, you know, the news was saying, oh, the Eisenhower's been hit. You know, the carriers are vulnerable. The Eisenhower's been hit. No, it's not. It hasn't been hit, and it's not vulnerable because it's got all these other ships around it too, and the fighters. So the 12th through the 17th, they fly these 5 missions, and they're really nugging down and decreasing the Houthis' ability to not only find the strike packages, but also to launch any type of cruise missile, ballistic missile, or drone at them. And on the 3rd of February, they have another one of these multi-axis, multi-wave, multi-domain attacks from the Houthis. Again, small boats, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones. And they called it the Rumble in the Red Sea. They gave it the nickname, the Rumble in the Red Sea. And the fighters, are doing all the same things. It's kind of the same thing as during those 5 packages from the 12th through the 17th. But now, it's more defensive because they're reacting to all of these things being shot at them. And on the 19th of February, they called this, I hope I get this name right, the Hodeidah hat trick. Hodeidah is a big port in Yemen, and it's the port where the Iranians' ships come and dock and offload all of these ballistic missiles, these cruise missiles, and these drones, and a lot of other weapons too. The Hodeidah port has massive cranes. I mean, go look at it on Google Earth. It's a fairly robust place. It has storage capability for fuel, has all of the dock equipment that you need to unload the ships. And they realize, hey, this is where all this stuff is coming in. This is their logistics base. So that makes it a primary target. And on the night of the 19th, they go after it. They're trying to take out their logistics, their ability to sustain themselves. This is kind of the same tactic and strategy that MacArthur had during World War II in the Pacific. You take over enough of the islands, the Japanese just die on the vine because all of the logistics is gone. And of course, we're doing the same thing. We're dropping 500-pound bombs on stuff. You still have the growlers that are providing suppression of enemy air defenses, all these different things. But they start bombing the port and taking out stuff there. Now, I want to mention this port one more time because I think it was the 20th of July, 20th of June or 20th of July. I can't remember which. The Israeli Air Force also visited this same port. And again, if you go to my YouTube and TikTok page, there is video of that strike. And here is some of that video of this airstrike. They used their F-16I Sufas, which are 2-seaters. They probably used, they call it a Delilah cruise missile. It's got about 100-mile range. They may have used Popeye AGM-142 off of their F-15E Strike Eagles, but it was a combined package of F-16s and F-15Es that this summer came down to this same port for this very same reason. The Iranians were flooding this place with fuel, armament, and the Israelis had been attacked already by the Houthis sending these cruise missiles and ballistic missiles over Saudi Arabia at places in Israel. And the Israelis just said, that's enough of that. And they went down and attacked the same place. This port is a very important piece of real estate to the Houthis. Because of the Iranians backing them, they have to keep that port open. And the Israelis came in, and there's great video of this. They were taking out the cranes and the fuel storage area. The fuel storage area burned like for 3 or 4 days when the Israelis struck this place. So this Houthi port, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And you can go on Google Earth and see this and zoom in on it. Matter of fact, here's a quick picture of it so you can kind of take a look at it and know what it looks like. And what did I tell you? Smart men and women study tactics, brilliant men and women study logistics. And if this is your main logistics base of your enemy, you pound it into non-existence. Later on in the month, this 22nd of February, the battle tankers strike back. And this was another first for the Navy and the independent. This was another first for the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group. They had some of these Super Hornets up doing the organic tanking. And of course, these airplanes still carry AIM-9Xs on the wingtips, AIM-120 AMRAAMs on the fuselage. And I guess it was the closest airplane, and they said, okay, go do it. And they committed some of these tanker configured Super Hornets on some drones and cruise missiles, and they took them out. And again, that was a first. This had never been done before. A Super Hornet in the tanking 5-wet configuration, engaging cruise missiles and drones, because again, they're carrying air-to-air weapons. Now, on the 5th of March, they had another first, this time with an EF-18G Growler. Same scenario, same situation. The Growlers were the closest aircraft to some of these drones and cruise missiles. The Growlers also carry AIM-120s on the fuselage, and they were committed against these drone/cruise missile targets and took them down. First time an EF-18G Growler jamming airplane, suppression of enemy air defense airplane, got an air-to-air kill on a drone or a cruise missile. Never been done before. So again, another first for the Growler community. Now, I think this shows some of the flexibility of all these assets that you have up. The Growlers, the jammers, and the Super Hornets that are in the tanking configuration still have their air-to-air capability. And the Growlers don't have a gun, but of course the other versions of the F-18 Super Hornet that were in the Air Wing 3, of course, do. And I found it surprising because I think somebody said we didn't have one gun kill. No gun kills. It was all done with missiles, which I found kind of fascinating because a bullet will do the damage too. Well, I think it was on the 19th of March comes the next wave of attack from the Houthis. And of course, they give this a nickname, this particular battle too. They call it March Madness. And the same thing happens again. The destroyers are out in the ocean, protecting the battle group, engage the ballistic missiles. They have fighters launching off of alert that are going from alert 5, and within minutes are engaging drones and cruise missiles that are coming at them and coming at the commercial shipping, and they take them all out and do the deed. So hopefully you can see this is an incredible, powerful group. And you have KC-135s that are involved in this. And it's about this time, if I remember right, that they do a joint strike also with the Air Force. And we'll just talk about that right now. Okay. They did a joint operation with the Air Force during this time period. The 494th Fighter Squadron from Lakenheath, the Panthers, and the 335th Fighter Squadron from Seymour Johnson, F-15E Strike Eagles, I believe were stationed at Shahid Mafwaq, deployed to Shahid Mafwaq in Jordan. They were supporting Operation Inherent Resolve, but they also got involved in the Houthi battles. And I think it was 3 days, they did this operation called Yukon Lightning. And again, it was adding more strike assets to the carrier strike groups and CAG 3s, Super Hornets, 4 Super Hornet squadrons to go after more of these Houthi targets. They also had, as part of the package, of course, the EF-18G Growlers, providing the suppression of enemy air defenses with these new AGM-88E model advanced anti-radiation missiles. So the Strike Eagles were coming down there, and some of them are loaded with air-to-air missiles so that they can take out drones and cruise missiles. And then some of them were loaded from the pictures that I saw. And here's one from the DoD that they put out just to kind of show you. Here's the EF-18G Growler, and here's the Strike Eagles loaded for air to ground, probably carrying GBU-54 laser guided laser JDAMs. The F-15E Strike Eagles are probably carrying AGM-54. The F-15E Strike Eagles are probably carrying GBU-54 laser JDAMs, and then the air-to-air ordnance also. But again, they're knocking back all of the Houthi SAM sites, early warning radars, and some of these launchers that they've now found through dynamic targeting and have pinpointed as potential launch sites. And they find a lot of these launchers and blow them away over these couple days. So understand that when you have those kinds of assets together, where you have the Air Force Strike Eagles, Air Force tankers, maybe even our AWACS and possibly RC-135 support, tied to the 4 strike squadrons on the Eisenhower and Carry Air Wing 3 with their E-2D advanced Hawkeyes, that's a really formidable force and a very flexible force. There's no target that you can't deal with when you've got all of those kinds of airplanes flying. And the Strike Eagles may have even been carrying some of the 2,000-pound bombs, maybe even penetrators, because some of these may be buried in some type of bunker. So I have not seen any of their Strike Eagle footage from the 494th. I do know that they were heavily involved in the night of the 13th through 14th of April, when there was over 300 cruise missiles, one-way attack drones, and ballistic missiles fired at Israel in retaliation for taking out that Hamas leadership, one in Lebanon and one in Tehran. So that kind of force is pretty scary, very formidable, very flexible. And there is a lot of combat power in that group. And for Yukon Lightning, they felt that, okay, the Strike Eagles have good legs, obviously coming down from across Saudi Arabia, maybe out over the Red Sea, and getting involved in these airstrikes and then going back to their base. Just know that when you're doing something like this, the F-15E Strike Eagles had to get permission from the Jordanian government to go down there and do this. You can't just have your strike assets in a country, leave the country, go do something that's assuredly going to be on CNN, and then turn around and come back and land and say, "Oh, sorry, that doesn't happen." King Abdullah of Jordan has been a faithful ally of the United States for a very long time, and has done some great things for us. So there's not a lot written on Yukon Lightning. There may be more later. I think there's a Wikipedia blurb about what happened, but I think you'll hear more about Yukon Lightning later on. I've kind of come to the end of the discussion here. I just want to go through lessons learned because, hey, this is the lesson from the Cockpit show. Number one, logistics. Logistics is absolutely crucial to everything our military does. Not having logistics bases down in this region caused numerous headaches to the battle group admiral and leadership because they were having to go farther to pick up things that they needed to support the fight. Djibouti doesn't have that capability to do all of this. I mean, the food, the gas, the weapons, all those kinds of things. The closest places for weapons is probably Al Udeid or Prince Sultan and Sicily, which is where the ships were going. Other AORs will have an effect on your operations where you are at. And again, UCOM and of course PACOM were supporting this fight with logistical support. But the headaches of having to plan your operations, not getting support from a store ship every 3 days, but maybe every 5 days, kind of stretches things pretty thin. I have driven John F. Kennedy while it was underway replenishing. They were hooked up for 6 hours. They took on 1.2 million gallons of jet fuel, like 12,000 hot dogs, 12,000 hamburger patties, lettuce, milk, as well as weapons, bombs, bullets, those kinds of things. So when you do these operations in an area that you've not operated from, the logistical support is critical. And we tend not to think about the logistics of operations first. We tend to think of it sometimes even last. The KC-135 is coming out of Prince Sultan. There's plenty of gas up there. And I learned during Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia keeps 55 billion barrels of crude oil under its country so that they can make it into whatever fuel that they need. Prince Khalid told General Mosley, "You are in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Gas will not be an issue." Getting that gas to a location and being able to offload it in a timely manner is another issue that they had with the tankers. We still use the Iron Maiden. We only bought 33 pod sets for the KC-135s, and there's still like 413 of them in the fleet. I was recently in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. KC-46 Squadron said they don't have any pod sets, but they've got a centerline drogue. But again, timing becomes an issue when you've only got one point to push 90,000 pounds through. If I've got 2 points, way more better, because it's always, always, always about contact points when you're passing gas. Always about that. The more contact points you have in the air, the better. And again, the timing of dynamic targeting can be very interesting, to say the least, because you may be waiting for a long time and then all of a sudden you have a flurry of activity And the Super Hornets hold a lot of gas internally. They're burning on average 8,000 pounds an hour when they're cruising around, 2,000 pounds a minute in afterburner, just to give you an idea of how much gas they're going to use. Whenever there is a crisis around the world, the first thing that the Secretary of Defense is going to ask, where is the nearest carrier? When the Houthis said we are going to attack commercial shipping going through the Gulf of Aden and the Bab al Mandeb Straits, somebody in the Pentagon said, okay, where's the closest carrier? And it may be a ways away or maybe on the way. And they'll tell it, Buster. That's the Navy term for go as fast as you can, bust your ass. And the power that you have in a carrier strike group is just freaking incredible. You've got 4 strike squadrons that have the latest missiles, radar, sensor systems, other than a 5th-gen fighter in Carrier Air Wing 3. You have the VAQ-130 EF-18 Growlers, and they were calling out SAM sites. They were calling out threats. They were launching the ARGMs at radars and got several drone kills while they were out. And then, of course, the command and control and the picture, the common operating picture. What does it look like? All of the ships have radar and the SLQ or Slick 32 electronic support measures systems on board. The E2D Advanced Hawkeye and, of course, the Growlers all have great radar homing and warning on them. And the E2 is giving the air picture because of its big radar that it has. A beautiful digital radar. And it goes out a ways. It's got a big footprint. And now it's air refuelable. And of course, the helos got involved. And it's been a couple months ago that I put up on my TikTok and my YouTube channel. They were practicing shooting down drones. And I had never seen anything like that. I thought, well, isn't this fascinating? Well, now you see why. And of course, using Hellfire on these patrol boats that were threatening the commercial shipping. These destroyers were critical to operations. Their 3-dimensional radars and the ability for their target tracking radars to look up at 60 miles and take out some of these anti-ship ballistic missiles, at 320,000 feet or lower, but still the ability to take out a ballistic missile with the new SM-6 missile that they've got in the vertical launches in the forward portion and rear portion of the ship are an incredible capability. Oh, I want to mention one thing. Some of you may have seen this picture of this, and well, let me put one up here just real quick. Take a look at this. The F-18 Super Hornets are now carrying SM-6. They call it AIM-174, Air Intercept Missile 174, but it's the same missile without the booster that is being carried in the destroyers and cruisers. And an F-18 launching this at, say, 0.8 Mach at 30,000 feet, this thing may go well beyond 250 miles to strike who knows what. And I understand there is an air-to-ground role for the AIM-174, but I don't know what it is yet. I need to do more research on that, because I was told when I was on a cruiser and destroyer that the SM-2 had a surface target capability as well as an air target capability. So I think it's going to be very interesting to find out, okay, what are the Super Hornets going to do with this great big missile? And you can see from this picture that I just showed you, it's big. It's a really big one. Okay. Joint ops with the United States Air Force adds an incredible capability to the carrier strike group, particularly when we're using our intelligence collection assets such as the RC-135 and the E-3 Sentry. But again, seeding some F-15E Strike Eagles into the strike packages with Carrier Air Wing 3 during Yukon Lightning gave them another capability to strike more targets with precision munitions. And everything that I've read and heard from these folks during this seminar where they destroyed every target that they were aiming stuff at, which of course is also incredible. And then again, you've got coalition partners, HMS Diamond, that was also involved in these operations and also has the capability of destroying surface targets with its Tomahawk land attack missile version and taking out ballistic missiles with their systems too. Do I want to touch on this? Yeah, I do. A number of people have commented both on my YouTube channel and my TikTok page. We're using a multi-million-dollar missile to destroy $100,000 cruise missile. The cost benefit analysis of this is therefore poor. I disagree emphatically with that kind of logic because nobody in that conversation has put a value on human life. How do you value a human life? And several of these Houthi attacks have killed a number of people on some of these commercial vessels that you just can't put a price tag on. Yeah, I'm using an expensive, highly tech weapon against something that is not so high tech, but still packs a big wallop. So I've asked a number of people, okay, tell me what price you put on some Filipino seaman who's on one of these ships steering it. What is his family? What's the price his family puts on him? Those kinds of things. And there was one incident that the battle group Admiral talked about that I found disappointing. There was a ship, what was it called? Motor Vessel Tudor, I think is what it's called. And it's a commercial like container kind of ship that got hit by one of these drones or cruise missiles and was sending out distress signals. And the battle group Admiral, Stem Miguez, said, I think he said 40 to 50 ships went by them without helping, lifting a finger, just going, nope, not us, and kept going. And he told me, he told the whole audience that once we found out that these ships were going by and everything, we had to help. And we sent some of our helos over to rescue wounded, and we took them aboard the carrier. And of course, on board the carrier, you can do all the way up to brain surgery inside the hospital spaces of the ship, and took care of these people and bandaged them all up. The United States Navy was the only organization that came to help this motor vessel Tudor in its time of need. And that's sad. Sad that 40 to 50 ships went by it with its distress signal blaring over the radio, and they said, no, we ain't getting close. Maybe they have their reasons. I don't know. But the but the battle group admiral was very proud of the fact that, hey, the Navy stepped up for a humanitarian operation to help these people on board this ship in the middle of combat operations. Not only help them, but work on them, and having our doctors on board the carrier and the smaller ships help these people out. Folks, that's your United States Navy. What has the Marine Corps said? We'll be your worst enemy if you fire on us, but you'll be your best buddy when you need help. And the Eisenhower's deployment to the Red Sea from November through, I think, April or May shows not only the professionalism, but the audacity with which we fight with. The professionalism of our force and the audacity with which we fight with. And again, unprecedented. So many firsts. The first EF-18 Growler air-to-air kill with an AMRAAM. An F-18 tanker, 5 wet, heavy, getting drone kills. The first use of JSOW-C on a target that was deep inside Yemen, but not deep enough where a JSOW couldn't get to it. And then again, the very first use of AGM-88E, advanced anti-radiation guided missile ARGM, on radars in Yemen. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been fun doing this. I would invite all of you to attend a Tailhook convention. It's not that expensive. It's $45 to come. It may be a little more if you're not a member. If you want to become a member of Tailhook, and it's open to anybody, I believe the dues per year is only $45. $45 to register to come to Tailhook. And it's held at the Grand Sierra Resort in Reno, which is absolutely beautiful, fabulous. The industry floor that they had up will astound you with all of the things that Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and so many others brought with them. They have what's called the Bug Roach Mixer on Friday night. It's flight suit night. The place was packed. And because there's a lot of liquid libation being passed around, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon were handing out really cool glassware. All right. Matter of fact, hang on here. I got some of it right here behind me. That's the glass that was being handed out by Raytheon. A mug, okay? Northrop Grumman's glass. Lockheed Martin's glass. And Lockheed Martin makes the LRASM, the long range anti-ship missile, okay? Shot glass, okay? And you can see it's heavy duty. Another favorite from Lockheed Martin. This was the LRASM shot glass from whiskey glass from this year. The other one was from last year. All right. And L3 Harris was passing out this one, okay? Whiskey glass. And folks, you could take more than one. Matter of fact, I saw one lady take like 4. I'm going to give them to all my kids, all right? The cool swag that you bring home from these things is really incredible. So that's another reason to go. But I had a friend of mine from California, Farshid, my Iranian buddy, came first year he's ever come, loves aviation, is not in the aviation field, but he came and registered. He actually did the Fallon tour, where they actually load up a bus with 90 people. That's the most that they can take. And they go out to NAS Fallon, where all the fighters do their workups. They have the aggressors out there. They have Top Gun out there, and you get a tour of Fallon. So you have the Bug Roach Mixer on Friday night. It's a flight suit night. The place was packed. 4,000 people attended this year. And then you have the Jig Dog Luncheon, which is the awards luncheon. And there's also a banquet I didn't go to. I drove home. But the mixer and the luncheon are an extra $35, $45 to register, probably a little bit more if you're not a member. But I would recommend all of you becoming a member of Tailhook, the Tailhook Association. They do a lot of great work. And they give out a lot of scholarships with the money that you pay in dues. So that's my commercial for Tailhook. And all my Navy buddies that were there. It was great to see you again. Great to see all of you again. Mooch, thanks for having me on your channel. Shortney, it's always great to see you. Sorry I missed my good buddy Moose. He didn't come this year. But I met a lot of new people too in some of these booths that we're going to have on the show. And I mentioned to you, F-14 pilot got a DFC the first night of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was also sitting in the River Rat, the Vietnam Red River Valley Association, and got to meet a lot of those guys too. So please, folks, take a look at becoming a member of the Tailhook Association and attending their convention next year. I think I paid $135 to go, and it was well worth the money. And like I said, a lot of that money goes to their scholarship foundation. And of course, you can also donate to their scholarship. This was the first year they had it in the Grand Sierra Resort, and they took great care of Tailhook to include a very, very generous offer for their scholarship foundation. So hats off to all of you at the Grand Sierra and the staff there. You put on a fabulous show. You were very professional. Anything I needed, you guys provided. And a matter of fact, members of the staff were coming up, sir, do you want something to drink? Do you need anything? Just a fabulous place to have the convention. And like I said, the industry floor is worth the $135 just to see all of the new things that are coming out and to talk to the people that are actually working on them. So that's my report on the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, Carrier Air Wing 3, Desron 22, and the seminar that they had. Folks, there's a lot more I want to say about my time at Tailhook this past weekend that I'm going to do in another show. But I wanted to get out this information on the USS Eisenhower Carrier Air Wing 3 and Desron 22, because it's unprecedented, folks. And to be in the Northern Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea is also very unprecedented. This was an incredible deployment. And listening to the stories that they were telling was phenomenal. I mean, everybody was just riveted. And a couple of days ago, I posted some of their gun camera film from this deployment. They came up with 2 new configurations for the Super Hornet. The heater wagon carrying 4 AIM-9Xs, as well as 5 AMRAAMs. And then the one they called the Murder Hornet, where it's just wall-to-wall, air-to-air weapons.
And then the famous quote by this junior officer, your morale is really high when you launch off a 5-minute alert to trigger squeeze, meaning you're doing something pretty incredible. You are doing something that is very rarely done in today's age. And the Eisenhower just did it, employing joint standoff weapon on some of these missile sites. And to be honest with you folks, I had no idea we were even using that thing still. We were using that back in Operation Iraqi Freedom back in 2003. And now there's an upgraded version of it. Plus they're using GBU 38s, GBU 54s, the laser JDAMs, and a number of other things. So this was really an incredible tailhook to go to, just to listen to this one seminar of all of these people that now have combat experience. 60 air-to-air missiles launched during their deployment. That's, again, amazing. This episode 87 of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. I'm going to do the 4 Super Hornet squadrons and the Zapper squadron and get those up here pretty soon. Because again, they've got bomb markings and missile markings on them. And I've got some contacts back there. They're going to help me put all this together. 147 ready to print right now. 4, 6, and 8 foot graphics. You can peel off and stick to the walls of your home, office, or hangar. Did a 30-footer for a guy, put it up in his hangar. We also do custom work. Go to wallpilot.com, fill out the custom form of your favorite airplane. We can put your name on it from whatever unit you want, whatever kind of weapons load you want on it, and send it to you. Go to wallpilot.com, because that's how this show is supported, folks. The money to operate Lessons from the Cockpit is directly comes from the sale of these prints that you see here above me on my YouTube channel at Mark Hasara. Thanks again, folks, for joining. Take care. Have a great week. And we'll talk to you next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit Show.